Let's create our first function. Keyword def. For example, I want my function to give me a value count. I can write end equals 10. But what if I write something like this? What do you think is the right way to call this function? Hello coders, welcome to my channel. I'm David, your guide to mastering programming. Now, you're probably wondering, what's this code about? Well, it's an example why today's topic is useful in programming. This is a nice example of how loops and conditionals can work together. Let's resolve this code line by line. First, I created a for loop that goes from 1 until 10. Then I check if I mod 2 equals 0. This means if I is even a number. Why? Because when I is divided by 2, if the change is 0, that means that I is divisible by 2. Then I print I and print is even in separate lines. Then I created a variable named x and gave it this value. I print these dashes just to separate the output from for and while. Then I created a while that is going to run until x is greater than 0. Then I created a variable digit and gave it value x mod 10. If you don't know what this line of code and this line of code does, I talked about them in my last video, so feel free to check it. The link to it is in the description below and in the upper right corner now. This line of code, this piece of code, and this piece of code are the same, as you can see. Now I check if digit is even. When I run this code, as you can see, from numbers 1 until 10, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10 are even, and digits that are even from this number are 2 and 4. As you can see, this piece of code and this piece of code is repeating. It's short and the logic is not that complex, so it's not that big of a problem. But what if the code was longer or more complicated? That's why we use functions in programming. Functions are reusable pieces of code. Let's create our first function. To create a function, you need to write the keyword def, then give a function a name, check even, then open the parentheses, and then the colon. Now we enter the function scope. Function scope is specific and I'll talk about it in some other videos. To create a function, you have to write these parentheses. They can be with parameters or without. Parameters are variables that will store values that functions receive. Here I want to pass I to it and digit so I can check if they are even. Here I can name it whatever. It doesn't have to be I or digit. I'll name it, for example, number, and then check if number is even. Then print the number and print is even. I'll comment this. To call a function, you simply need to write its name, then open the parentheses. If the function doesn't have any parameters, you can leave it just like this. But if it has, you have to give all those parameters a value. For example, I'll pass value I to the parameter number. This is the same as number equals I. This is how Python translates this. Here I can also do that. Check, even, and then digit. This is the same as number equals digit. Now, when I run this code, as you can see, the output is completely the same. But this way of coding it, it's cleaner and it's also easier to understand. I'll remove all of this. Now, if I want to, let's say, count how many numbers are even in some sequence and then print the value, I can write a function for that can calculate me from the start until end how many numbers are even. For example, I can write def, then even range, and then start. Also, you don't have to have just one parameter. You can have as many as you like. You just need to separate them with commas. Start and end here, then colon. I'll have a count variable that starts from 0, then for I in range start and end. This means I will go from start until end, excluding the end, but if I want to include the end, I'll simply write here +1. So this way the end is included. Here I can check if I mod 2 equals 0, then count, then increment count. Now we want somehow for our function to give us that value. If you want a function to give you that value, you need to write the keyword return and then write what you want your function to give you. For example, I want my function to give me a value count, to return me a value of count. Now I can simply write code like this: x equals even range and then start. No, I will go from 1 until 10, including the 10, and then print x. How many even numbers are in this range from 1 until 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we expect to see 5 here. As you can see, 5 is printed. That's what we wanted. Now, as you remember in range, you didn't have to specify the start or the step. You could just leave them empty, just like here, and the Python would give them value. You can also do that, but it's important that all those defaults come after the parameter that the user has to specify the value. For example, I can write end equals 10 if we don't specify the exact value. For example, I can now remove this 10 and the code would be the same. As you can see, the output is the same, 5. But I can't have something like this. Start, then 1. This won't work, as you can see. But I can have all of my values as default. For example, end and then 10. Now I don't have to pass any value to my even range function. So when I run, also, as you can see, the 5 is also being printed. Maybe here you just want to say, okay, I want my end to change, but the start to be default. In order to do that, Python created some that's called, for example, I can write end equals 3. As you can see now, the start will be 1, but the end will be 3. So our output should be 1 because there's only one even number between 1 and 3. As you can see, 1. I can also specify start, but start doesn't have to be before end. It could be after. For example, end equals 3 and start equals 2. As you can see, there's also 1. This is very useful with built-in functions. You don't have to know the exact sequence of the parameters. You can just know the name of them and give them values one by one. Python also developed a way to enforce you to use these keyword arguments or to use these positional arguments. These are called positional because I didn't specify the start and the end, and based on the position, the value is given. Start comes first, 2 comes first, so start has the value of 2. Now I'll write you some example. Here, as you can see, we have two parameters, start and end. Now, if I want to force someone to use keyword argument for end, I can simply write the asterisk sign, then comma. Now, all the parameters after this asterisk sign have to be assigned using keyword arguments. Let's say print range, and I give start 1 and 2. As you can see, the error is being printed. But if I print, let's say, end equals 2, now everything works just fine, 1 and 2. That doesn't mean that 1 has to be passed positionally. It can be passed using keyword arguments as well. This just means that all the parameters after asterisk sign have to be passed using keyword arguments. Here I can write start equals 1. This is also going to work. But let's say I want to enforce all of them. I can simply write. Now, the values to start and end must be passed using keyword arguments. If I remove the keyword from one of them, it won't work, as you can see. But what if I want for start to be positional, only positional, not keyword? I can simply write dash. Now it means all the arguments before dash have to be positional. As before, that doesn't mean that and has to be positional. As you can see, and can be either positional or keyword argument, like here. But what if I write something like this? What do you think is the right way to call this function? Write it down in the comments below. I hope you found this video helpful. Like and subscribe for more coding content. See you in my next video. Until then, keep coding.